Om Agnir Murta Chakshusi Chandra Suryo Vishaha Shrotrivak Vivitasha Vedaha Vayu Prana Hridaya Vishvamasha Padbayam Prativihi Sarvabhutantaratmam Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. Verily, that one Supreme Being is the indwelling consciousness in all things. Fire is its head, the sun and moon its two eyes. The revelation of Scripture is its cosmic mind. The universe is its heart, its arms and legs the four directions. Wind is its breath, music is its voice, and from its feet the earth has originated. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Vedanta Siddhanta Nirukti Resha Brahmaiva Jivaham Sakalam Jagadcha Akanda Rupa Stiti Reva Moksho Brahma Advitiye Shrutayaha Pramanam. Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. It is the sure and certain declaration of the Vedanta that all is Brahman. Time, space, living beings, and the world. Living in constant recognition of this fact is what is called enlightenment. Brahman is pure and perfect, and one without a second. And the revealed scriptures are the apt and final proof of this fact. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Sahana, Om Sahana Bhavatu, Sahana Bhunaktu, Saha Viryam Kharavo Vahai, Tejasvi Navaditamastu, Ma Vidvesho Vahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman, the reality, protect us. May Brahman sustain us. May Brahman illumine our thinking process. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, or with the teachings. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, and may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om. We welcome everyone here today, the live streaming audience, which is tuned in from various points of the world, as far away as India and Hawaii. And we also welcome all the SRV devotees here in Portland, Oregon, at this center, at this chapter. There are 3 ashramas, we like to call them, trying to keep the ashram idea alive in Western world, or maybe even introduce it to it in a deeper level, because in the 60s and 70s we found some ashrams forming in spiritual communities too, but they didn't last very long, and we're trying to disprove Swami Vivekananda's declaration about Americans, that they're just straw on fire, that they burn out quickly after they get a new idea. He said they're very liberal. They accept everything from the world. They're the first to accept it and champion it, but then they're not that long lasting in their dedication to it. So we want to try in SRVdom, that is where you have tuned into. We have been going for over 20 years in steady dedication to the ideal that Swami Vivekananda has brought to us in the form of the Vedanta. And it's an underground river, masquerading or generally known maybe on the surface as Hinduism, but deep inside of India, as we know, called the mother of all religions. There is this deep well of knowledge, of wisdom, of truth, and a whole series of scriptures and avatars and prophets and seers and saints and sages that are all dedicated to it throughout the millennia. So much so that we find it right here and right now in our Western continent in this very time, being talked about in no uncertain terms through the Upanishads, 108 of them, and in our dedicated way in SRV, we've been taking one at a time. We've been studying them, and that's given rise to a series of charts that you see before you. Some over 200 of them now has come out of such study, and we're continuing to move forward in our understanding of the ancient rishis of India, the Sapta rishis, the 7 great rishis, and all of the 10 mind-born sons of Lord Brahma, who is the projector of this fantastic creation that we see around us, in the different heavens within us, as Christ said, and come to understand these non-dual axioms that underlie India's longevity. Other paths come and go, as we see. Some, as Sri Ramakrishna said, some are springs that come out of the ground and disappear back into the ground. And then there are some that are streams and flowing into rivers and flowing into tributaries that flow into the ocean, like the major religions of the world. They have some long-lasting existence to them and can then bring hundreds and thousands of souls to salvation. But the unique thing about India is that it brings souls not just to salvation, but to emancipation, to freedom. And of course, nobody probably epitomizes that better in recent times than Lord Buddha. That's fairly recent for India. 550 years before Christ is fairly recent for India in that long-lived period. And then we see certain lights come forth. We were just reading about one of them in the form of Sri Chaitanya, who is this great God-man of 14th century, I think, 1400s or so. And then what people are talking about, a further incarnation of that great soul in the form of Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, who was here amongst us in 1836 to 1886, and his direct disciple, Swami Vivekananda. And of course, the hidden secret of the Divine Mother that came with him, epitomized in Sri Sharda Devi herself, and that's where you find yourself, in really Sri Sharda Devi ashrams, because my teacher was a direct disciple of her, the last living direct disciple of her. And there are a few among us who can claim that and trace our spiritual heritage back to Holy Mother and to Sri Ramakrishna. And of course, we learned from the monks of the what's called affectionately the Vedanta societies. They're not called that in India. There's so many of them in India. They're Ramakrishna Mat and Mission, but we learned from these swamis who dedicated themselves to America. My particular teacher, who lived here in Portland for over 40 years and dedicated his whole life to America. He never went back to India once. I think he was the only swami that never did that. The other swamis came and visited and had centers here, and they all visited back, but Swami Sheshananda never went back once. He stayed here the whole time, first in New York, then in California for a while, and up in Seattle a little bit, and finally found his own center here in Portland. And some of us were very fortunate then. When I was born here, that is, I'm not saying I was ever born, don't get me wrong, but when I took a body here, it was across the river, you see, and upstate a little bit, and Swami Sheshananda was here in America already, and so I found my way to him just a few miles away and began to take teachings from him. And then that gave way to the birth of the SRV associations that are under my care at present, 3 of them, and then it also gave way to Lex Hickson and the national SRV that he started back on the East Coast, and they gathered together some of the other Vedantists from the East Coast Swamis, and we began our trek since the mid-1980s now. SRV has been in existence, and these particular societies of ours, the SRV West Coast, you might say, and Greater Pacific Rim, SRV associations, started in the 90s. So we've been here a while and doing this, and you know that if you visited us this weekend, live streaming or live, to find out that we've been studying, we cracked the book on the Taittiriya Upanishad. I'd say it's one of the more difficult Upanishads to understand, along with the Chandogya and the Aranyaka. You can see these are all divided into 4 Vedas, 108 Upanishads divided in this way. The ones that are underlined are the ones that we're, you might say, more conversant with, because Shankara in 700 AD did his great commentaries on those 11. The other 99 are called minor Upanishads, but not that they have a lesser message, as we found out, because we've looked into some of those and found profound teachings there. But the Taittiriya falls here with the Yajurveda, you can see it underlined here, and the Krishna Yajurveda portion of that Veda. And we find that its main message starts out as it wants us to know about the natural oneness of everything. A rather cliche way of saying it, but they call it they call it conjunctions, actually, just to use an English word to make it easier. The natural conjunctions of things and how we should meditate upon them. I'd say that that's probably straight to the point, because generally humanity takes things for granted. And the art of meditation, whereas of course it's best utilized for I and my Father are one type awareness, that is what's called a non-dualistic meditation. Nevertheless, it also has its concomitants, you might say, a sort of natural concomitants. As you sit to meditate, you begin to resolve karmas unknowingly, and you begin to unmake complexes in the mind. There's no other English words for that, but they call them samskaras in Western psychology, complexes, but those only last one lifetime, and you don't trace them back anywhere. But in India, there's samskaras in the mind, and you trace them back to different lifetimes, and it's one of the ways in which you discover you've lived many times in different bodies. So as a karma and reincarnation being relative laws. And then by that kind of tracing of origins, they call it utpatti in Sanskrit, you can find your way back to the first lifetime you ever took, as it were, or the beginning of the ego, I'd call it. The ego, which wants to have this separate body and this separate senses and this separate enjoyment, and wants to separate itself from not only God, unfortunately, Brahman we call in Vedanta, but separate itself from everyone else and everything else. The only problem is it's not separating itself from that one thing that's its biggest problem, ignorance. Or you could call it nature. In yoga and Lord Buddha both discussed about separating yourself from form, at least long enough to see your formless nature. And then if you want to play in form again, it's no problem, because you have traced your origin back to a formless source. But when the West, or when contemporary people think about formlessness, they think about voids and emptiness and death and nothingness and things like that. But India comes forward and tells you that nothing doesn't exist. There's no such thing as nothing. There's always something. It's just a matter of whether it's hidden or it's manifested. When it's manifested, it's called prakriti, and when it's unmanifested, it's called unmanifested prakriti. You go into unmanifested prakriti in deep sleep tonight, when you neither wake nor dream, when there's no forms left. You manage to go back into this formless state and get great refreshment and refection out of being nobody. And when you're an ego, unfortunately, you're somebody. And that somebody takes on all sorts of other coverings and runs the risks of so many other problems, like the 6 passions and the 8 fetters and the 5 kleshas and the 9 antaryayas, and then you have to start taking paths like the 37 limbs to enlightenment and the 8 limbs of yoga, and so it gets into a matter of, I have to practice now. And then the Advaita Vedanta stands forward and said, you're already that. So caught in that kind of thing, humans are like treading water, trying to stay afloat in some sort of enlightenment, either relative or absolute. So India and the Upanishads make great clarifying statements. They definitely emphasize the oneness of existence. Those are called Mahavakyas, like Aham Brahmasmi. That's probably the most straight to the point. I am Brahman. It removes the line of demarcation between God and spirit and creature and creator. It just obliterates that, and you meditate on that. Of course, you have to be ready to meditate on that. If you're not ready for that, then you get a mantra instead, you see, and you meditate on a high form, because you've been meditating on lesser forms all the time, you see. And actually, that meditation on lesser forms hasn't been a concentrated meditation. It's been scattered meditation. You meditated on your children for a while, you meditated on your job, you meditated on your schooling, and you meditated on your money, and you did all these sort of scattered meditations without any real cohesive center to it. But now they want you to look back on all of that and begin meditating on earth, air, fire, water, ether, and the five senses and how they connect to the five elements. And then you have to look into your dream state and see how your five senses and the five elements also persist in dream state. You have lands that you roam, kingdoms of heaven within, chambers in the Father's mansion that you go to whenever you leave your five senses and your physical body. And so you have to clarify that. All the nadis running through your body, that's nerves, are really, each one of them contain 100,000 subtler nerves that you can't dissect and see, and along that the prana is flowing. And the prana is carrying your thoughts away at the time of sleep and at the time of death, and definitely at the time of meditation if it's a non-dual meditation. So they do emphasize these non-dual truths, but then they also say, you should look at nature and study it from a detached witness standpoint. If you study it too closely, like say science is doing, then you kind of get swept into it, you see. You start believing in atomic particles and subatomic particles and neutrons and quarks and protons. That takes all your attention. And then when you come to the end of that and there's nothing solid, nothing substantial in that atomic particle, then all of a sudden you can't look back at the teachings of Christ and Buddha and say that you've been building your life on sand, on shifting sand all the time, the shifting sand of particles, you see, or look back to Lord Buddha's teachings and hear that word shunyata, that everything is empty, give it up. So you're not able to, in spite of all your deep study of physical matter, nature, you're not able to make the right conclusion once you find it. You've been lost in it. So that's why Sri Ramakrishna said, don't never study the Maya from within inside Maya. Get outside of Maya and look at it from a distance, like you would study a fog bank dissipating in the sun. Because if you're inside of it, you really don't know what's going on, what the changes are happening, the permutations and the transitions, and you really don't see those as being a part of the process and ultimately being unreal when the sun burns it all away. So there are these approaches you take then, say in Tantra, where you deify everything. Instead of renounce it, you deify it. So Tantra's way has always been to come to the thing, see it, take it up, study it, and worship it, and then let it go. So it's a little bit different than the finishing school of Vedanta. You see, the non-dual truth, where you just cut it all away in an instant. You probably don't even believe in it when you're born. You're just coming back to help others, like great souls. But then there's also, in between those two ways, you might say there's this yogic way. And the Upanishads espouse them all. If you look at some of the names of these Upanishads, sometimes they're named after gods and goddesses. Sometimes they're named after life force. Sometimes they're named after absolute reality. Sometimes they're named after practices. And quite often all referring back to the sort of central tenet of it all, Om, the word, how important the word is. So you find that the Upanishads embrace all of these, but that kind of other way that I was just mentioning would be yoga. But if your society is materialistic and some bunch of fools have brought over some physical asanas and told you that that's all there is to yoga, then you're not going anywhere, you see. The body's going to die no matter what you do with it. So you've got to get the 8 limbs of yoga together. You've got to know that you start, as we did yesterday's class, with the 5 yamas and niyamas and study them. The first one is ahimsa. If you're violent, the universe is a closed book to you in a way, and so is your mind. Your brain becomes violent. Your mind won't accept you. You see, so. But not to make distinctions like that. Mind and brain, 2 different things. You see, mind is consciousness, and you have to trace it back to original mind, and brain is just a noodle inside of a physical body that has a few memories and so forth and functions temporarily. So this process of distinctions is called viveka, or the discrimination between the real and the unreal. And yoga would start you out with non-violence and then take you on to practice of truthfulness and then non-covetousness. Do not covet the goods of any other beings, which would be a nice axiom for Western politics at this time. And then take you into other areas of your own observances and then practices. See, practices mean basically in yoga, do a little bit of stretching of your abilities. That's called tapas, or austerity. And also means find out God with form and worship that. And also has to do with purifying yourself, body-mind mechanism. That's called saucha. And being content with what is, that's called santosha. So there are these practices in yoga that purify body, senses, brain, mind, and begin to take you into that philosophical and psychological level that yoga is so adept at affecting. And then you begin to realize the origins of all things happening back in the mind, in the collective mind of human beings, and trace that back to the mind of God. And then you've got this very deep relationship going with origins and with steps that happen in sets of 5s. I mean, you have 5 fingers, 5 toes, 5 senses, 5 elements, 5 subtle elements in dream to night, 5 kinds of life force flowing through you, 5 great laws to follow, 5 sheaths over the Atman. I mean, you just go on and on with these sets of 5s. It's called the quintuplication process, and it's an ancient path that nobody nowadays really sees or tries to follow. But if you study the Upanishads, you will come in contact with it. Basically, we're heading for a sloka at the end of a lesson that speaks about it too. That is, to quote, "The seer who revealed this path by his own deep intuition, having grouped the various objects together, declared that the whole universe is based on a 5-fold principle, and that one set of 5 preserves the other set of 5. So each one preserves and supports the next set of 5. So back to my main point about Taittiriya's wanting us to understand conjunctions. In order to understand that everything is indivisible, that consciousness is seamless, homogeneous, and non-separable, and that you are that, and then they say, well, if you're in a world where you're considering everything to be far-flung, like a universe way outside of yourself, and other people across the world that you don't know, and you don't know that all of this has come out of one indivisible consciousness, then start practicing the art of conjunctions. That conjunction means this bring everything together into a harmonious whole. There's a beautiful meditation chant we we chant Om Drishyam Pratitam Pravilapayan San Matram Anandaganam Vibhavayam Samahita San Bahir Antaram Va Kalam Nayetaha Sati Karma Bande. That is Sati Karma Bande, burn your karmas. But earlier on, basically take what's internal and what's external and render them into one state. Because that's what's, so you haven't put together the A of Om with the U of Om yet. So these three mantras of Om, A-U-M, the great word which is the source of everything that Christ tried to explain to John and John didn't understand, that word is made of three mantras, and you're leaving them disconnected. Your waking state is disconnected from your dream state, and so forth. So you have to take what's external, all of this, 5 senses, 5 elements, nature and all that, and connect it back with your internal nature, from where it sprung. If you're looking out in space, then you're following the wrong direction. All the kingdoms of heaven lie within you. The origins to things lie within you. And the great Lord itself lies within you. The Divine Mother herself is within you. All gods and goddesses are within you. Your ancestors that have departed the realms are within you. Every one of us feels that. What's the word here? Intuitively, you see. By his own intuition, he found that everything was based on the 5-fold principles. So you connect them up. You find them first. You see that they're disparate, scattered. You connect them up by meditating on them, and you put them together. You put the fragmented world that has been torn apart by violence and greed and all other contrary principles, contrary to the laws of the Dharma, and you put them all back together inside of yourself, and you become a realized soul. And then you can say, Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman. I find that it's all within me. Or as Vivekananda said, I am a Vedantist. I hardly find any other God than my own self. I don't find any other God anywhere but my own self. Is he talking about his ego? No, he's talking about the true self, the great self, the Atman, and how it's at the source of everything, the underlying substratum of everything, and how he, through meditation, connects that. And connected it long ago and became a Nitya Siddha, an eternally perfect soul, according to Sri Ramakrishna, his guru. And now he lives in that oneness. He doesn't have to meditate on conjunctions. He knows everything is, in its innate sense, indivisible. And now he has to come amongst us and tell us how to bring them together. You see, how to bring them together into a cohesive whole that it already is. So take the external and the internal, render it into one indivisible state, and then meditate on that state. Spend your time contentedly and be free. That's how Shankara put it in 700 AD, when he took the whole sweep of the Vedanta and just put it together in scriptures like the Viveka Chudamani, which we studied here before in SRV. So that first great principle of the Taittiriya Upanishad is conjunctions. We studied that Saturday before last, that is a week from yesterday. And Sunday we went on and we started working our way through these lessons, because the Taittiriya Upanishad happens in lessons that contain one or more slokas in each. And we found next that the Rishi of this Upanishad, see the Upanishads, some of them are even named after other Rishis, the family that founded them. They didn't write them down for so long, they just taught them by rote to their children. Recite and call back and response, you see, and then meditate on them and learn another one. And so pretty soon they became so well matured and refined through that process that then there came an age when they wrote them down. And so sometimes they would, like the one we just studied, Svetashvatara Upanishad, that's named after the great Rishi Svetashvata. So his whole family line had learned this Upanishad and kept it alive for many generations. And we find that way it's come down to us, what's a good word in English? Uninterpolated. You see, from guru to disciple, from father to son, from mother to daughter, uninterpolated, exactly as it was in the original, without any distortions. It's right down into English now, with the fewest distortions possible. And we probably can't say that about many other scriptures of other religions. It's passed through the hands of all sorts of various beings, kings and royalty and people who never meditated. So I just did a little translation, maybe scholars and professors or pundits, priests. But what about through illumined soul to illumined soul, whose only intention was that their children be free? That's their only intention. They didn't want to embroil you back into nature, back into Maya. They wanted you to be free, because the body is a composite of decaying things, and it passes through birth, growth, disease, old age, decay, and death. And it encounters lust, anger, greed, envy, pride, delusion, and pride of caste and pride of lineage, and shame and greed, and the 6 passions and the 8 fetters, all based on an ignorant birth, that you didn't even know that you came from anywhere or actually going anywhere by the end of your life. So the fathers, mothers of the rishis, of the children, we don't want you caught in that. We want to free you. And that was the intention. And that intention kept the Upanishads pure. There must have been many more than 108 of them. Those were lost. But if it hadn't been for Vedavyas, who is affectionately called the father of Vedanta, Vedavyas gathered them together at one time. And that was fairly recent. But they stretch back, carbon dating, thousands of years prior to Christ. The Rig Veda is one of the oldest of all of them. And in there you find mention of Divine Mother of the Universe and these, let's call them concepts. These concepts that are new to the Western mind, that's been raised under the terrible Father God kind of idea. So you find this compassionate Mother God coming forward and people responding to her. I just heard yesterday, this person isn't very spiritual, my boss, he's not very spiritual, but he understands my spiritual path and lets me go to it. Oh yes, he does like the goddess Tara. He does like the goddess Tara. So even amongst people who don't have a spiritual path, they hear a certain name or a certain word or a certain concept and they respond to it. I think I like that. I'll take Mother Tara as my secret refuge, And then it's just a matter of time before she will lead him to a lifetime where he can sit like you are, and sit like I did with Swami Sheshananda, and like Swami Vivekananda did with Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa and Holy Mother. And then you understand the whole secret of the rishis. You understand the whole secret of time, that it's all contained in one moment, not in a linear flow. If you get into the linear flow, then at least one thing you should understand is that there are many linear flows, like a figure 8, see, and that there's no beginning, middle, and end to anything. And then you won't fall into the problem of the scientists, thinking that there was a Big Bang and then an end, and life somehow evolved. You were once a monkey or some nonsense like that. You see, my Pete used to say that, they're trying to convince me that I have to go to the zoo to see my ancestors. But I have many lifetimes back inside me of ancestors and rishis and great souls that stretched all the way back to the sun god himself. And that's why they worship Surya, you see, or Agni. We were just chanting that. Om Agni is the first words I said today. Om Agnir Murta Chaksusi Chandra Surya. Chandra, sun, and a moon, you see, and Surya, sun. So fire is its head, sun and moon are its 2 eyes. They've been thinking this for thousands of years. And what is that fire in the head? So that's intelligence. Buddha named himself after it, because when he saw an ocean of it, he knew what Buddha nature was. They say, Buddha didn't believe in God. That's nonsense. He didn't follow the Vedas at the time because they weren't being taught right by 550 BC. But he called that reality Pragyaparam, the supreme intelligence. Tathagata a mass of consciousness. If you hear Buddha speak something like that, you're going to somehow prematurely decide that he didn't believe in God? Well, maybe he didn't emphasize the formless, emphasize the God with form very much, you see. But who was he, if not God with form? Who is Jesus come before you, if not God with form? Who is your teacher sitting in front of you, if not God with form? Who are your Sangha, you see? And what is the Dharma, the teachings, if not God with form? So you're back to deifying every little thing, you see, and seeing it as it truly is, not how it seems to be. As it seems to be is Maya. As it truly is, it's Brahman. And that was the second chant I gave you today. Vedanta Siddhanta Nirukti Resha Brahmaiva Jivaham Sakalam Jagadcha. The Vedanta declares that everything is Brahman. Time, space, living beings in the world, all that reality, you're just not apprehending it rightly. See? You haven't stripped the coverings off the gift yet. You're still believing in changing reality. See? Well, change that changing reality into God with form, and then you'll have at least half the picture. See? You'll put the horse before the cart, you see. That was that joke we come up with sometimes, you see. It says, Descartes that said, you see, I think, therefore I am. And I say, oh, Descartes, you're putting the cart before the horse. You see. Don't put the cart before the horse. I am, therefore I think, is the truth. And that's what Vedanta says. I am consciousness first, then the mind happens. And if you think the mind is the origin of everything, you've only gone halfway to the source. You have to go to the great mind, Mahat. And that's what we find here. Bur, Bhuva, Swaha, Maha. You see, the four Vyahritis they're called. And that brings us current to the sloka that we're studying in lesson 5. And we left off yesterday talking about food, because that's another thing this Upanishad begins to concentrate on. It concentrates on food and prana. My saying that I often espouse is, man does not live by bread alone. And what does that mean when Christ said that? And some people would say, if they were a little bit compulsive and too early on the scene, they'd say, well, that means that basically man lives by God, right? No, God's not a form, so you can't make God a source for anything. Sort of one of the strange declarations of the Vedanta that you have to get used to because you have to realize they're concentrating on formless reality, and they're leading you towards formless reality. That's the whole point. That's the one thing missing in the quotient here, is that we're also attached to form on so many levels. Even when we think about God, it's a form. But the Vedanta says, no, God is formless, is transcendent. Forms are born, forms die, forms experience time, forms occupy space. God doesn't do any of that. That Brahman, that formless Brahman, is free of all those things. In fact, it's the only thing that is free of all those things, so let's leave it that way. We've managed to bind ourselves very nicely into a body with 5 elements and 5 senses. Let's leave God free. We don't have to bind him into form too, do we? So Vedanta steps forward and says, keep that Brahman formless. Keep it pure and perfect. And Vivekananda comes along in 1893 and tells you, there's 2 tendencies in you. There's the tendency to drag God down to your comfort zones. And then there's the tendency of a few to take themselves up to God. See, unfortunately, most beings take the first route. They try and bring God down here. I mean, they turn it into everything: children, cars, money, angels, gods and devils. But they never leave it as it is, pure and perfect and formless. So instead, raise yourself to that divine reality and leave it as it is, and try and measure yourself by the formless reality. That's meditation, basically. It's where you finally reach the meditation path. That rishi, through his meditation, and his intuition found out the secret of the quintuplication process. You see, that was done by inwardness, not outwardness. So he was looking for something like Buddha was when he sat for 49 days under the bo tree to meditate. And he was looking for that formless reality, for a way off the wheel of birth and death. Called it the Kala Chakra. He knew there must be a way off, even in that age, which was a later age. 550 BC is a late age to the Vedantist. It's more recent. Lord Buddha is more recent. He's sort of like the new kid on the block, as far as India is concerned, and rather a rebel child of India too, they call him. And Muhammad is even more recent kid on the block. See, so you have these great souls still coming from 500 to 600, 700 years apart. Call them avatars, or great messengers or prophets, and they appear from age to age, as this picture says on the wall there, appearing from age to age to restore the Dharma and destroy the old Dharma. That is, destroy those aspects of the old Dharma that no longer work for us. Like these superstitions we hold in the name of religion. So we've turned this formless Brahman into everything but what it is. We've even made it a means for war, excuse to go to war. My God against your God, and so forth. My religion against your religion. It was the greatest mistake of religion to get involved in politics in the first place, or any kind of business. It's business if it's a capital R religion and not a little small r religion, is to meditate and to establish communication with reality, with the highest forms and beyond form, and then pass those teachings on to their children, like what's happened here in the Upanishads, for thousands of years uninterrupted, to come down to us to this day, so that we can hear things like, there is within the heart the bright space known to all. There let the worshipper meditate and realize the intelligent, imperishable, effulgent self. The hollow canal called the Sushumna lies through the two arteries of the upper palate and the nipple-like growth that hangs down from amidst the two palatal arteries. It passes out of the crown of the head, where the root of the hair is made to part, opening the skull and the center, like the sagittal suture before the baby is fully developed. See, it closes. That is the gate leading to the Supreme Lord, this major artery, this major channel, Sushumna is called. That is the channel leading to the Supreme Lord. This is where the great souls enter and exit the body, you see, through these higher spiritual centers. Throat, third eye, crown. You see, we have to use the physical body to point to it, but it's not in the physical we're talking about, it's in the subtle. That is the gate leading to the Supreme Lord. The worshipper of the time of his final body gains his exit from the body through that passage, and so forth and so on. So you have Upanishads bringing that kind of esoteric wisdom to you. How'd you like to be at a party with a bunch of people gabbing, and then all of a sudden say, "Oh, listen, I have something to tell you. There is in the center." You should start reading that out. You see, would it be a non sequitur or what? You see, or would they be just totally stunned to hear the truth, right there in the midst of the Maya that they're involved in, and the pretending away reality and grabbing everything possible to stuff in away as veils. But the spiritual aspirant wants to tear those veils away. Maya is she who leads you on with one hand and covers your eyes with the other hand. See, so some of them want to see where they're going. They want to see where all of this is leading, and they're not content to be blind. They want, if thine eye be single, you shall know the truth. They want that to be prominent in their spiritual life. They want to see through the journey, you see, not just walk it blindly. I mean, you can walk the journey to its end, but then there's a way that you can see that all movement is nonsense. coming and going is mere nonsense, as Vivekananda said. Where's the time when the soul will come, when all of time is already in your soul? Where's the space that you will go to, when all the space is already in your soul? You're just moving around in your own essence, you see. And all that essence is contained inward as a homogeneous mass of pure conscious awareness. Chidgana. See? So in that way, the Upanishads bring us to teachings like this, and this is where we ended yesterday at 12:30 at noon, and we adjourned, and we come back this morning to find out that the recent sloka is talking about food. Now we are in lesson 5, and this is the sloka that ends with the teaching of Maha, the great mind. Says, Maha is the sun, the moon, Brahman, Om, and food. Verily, through the sun, all worlds, through the moon, all light, through Brahman, all the Vedas, that is that Upanishadic chart, and through food, all animate beings are magnified. These indeed are the 4 vyahritis, comprised of a group of 4 and becoming fourfold. So vyahriti means a great utterance, a great statement. So then we studied yesterday the Gayatri mantra, right? Om, Bhur, Bhuva, Swaha, Tat Savitur Varenyan. So we studied Om, Bhur, Bhuva, Swaha. Those are the first 3 of these vyahritis, which is a kind of Sanskrit word that we're not that used to, but just think of it as a mystical utterance. And then you'll know that these words are created by a thought in the mind of God. See, one scientist said recently, the whole world is a thought in the mind of God. James Jeans said at the turn of the century, we studied nature, we looked like a machine, but now it's beginning to look to me like a thought. So even some of the scientists are beginning to think about the power of thought. Here's where, physics and quantum mechanics and all that could sort of begin to dovetail with theology and with psychology, and they could begin to get on the same page here and see the universe as one indivisible mass of pure conscious awareness based in intelligence. And then the theories like 7-day creation theory and the 4,320,000,000 year evolutionary cycles could find a place inside of this greater truth, that all is, that everything is, that Brahman is all there is. Vasudeva Sarvam. So we find that Vedanta has that answer for us if we have the patience to sit and unwrap ages of conditioning in our thinking in previous lifetimes where maybe we didn't have such a guide as these lights in our life. So we arrived then at this chart which had to do with food, prana, Om, and Brahman, how those connect. And we read this first sloka, that's where we ended Saturday. This first sloka says, and it's by Holy Mother, my teacher's teacher. Well, actually the one on top we were talking about. From pure food one gets pure blood. Pure blood produces pure thoughts. Pure thoughts lead to pure mind. And pure mind is God. Pure mind is Brahman. That was uttered to us by Sri Sharda Devi when she was living here in India in the 1920s on this very planet. There are songs written about her already. Sri Sharda Devi He Mahamate Sri Rama Krishna Guru Deva Samprite Parama Pavana Hridaye Kali Yuga Dasite Bhakti Indaradi Devunina Nama Shri Shri Rama Krishna, Shri Rama Krishna, Shri Rama Krishna, Guru Deva Samprite. And so forth. It goes on and on, saying, O great mother, Shri Sharda Devi, whose only fulfillment is in Shri Ramakrishna, you are the Sita of our age. That is, in an ancient age it was Sita and Rama, and then the next age was Radha and Krishna. And we saw great couples go by like Christ and Mary and Fatima and Muhammad and finally come here to this age and find Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother as this divine couple manifesting again in another age to relate to us these truths. So these truths, if you want to start from where all beings are, food. See, food is Brahman. Om Brahmarpanam Brahmahavir Brahmagnao Brahmanahutam. Food is, Brahman is the offering of the food. Brahman is the taking of the food. Brahman is the act of offering and the act of taking. Brahman is the articles on which the food is placed. Brahman is the one partaking and the one offering. And Brahman is the nourishing power in the food, called prana. Those who understand this simple truth have their karmas destroyed. And they reach the highest state of consciousness. Brahma karma samadhina. The chant ends. That's right out of the Gita, from an age when Radha and Krishna were living. And Krishna was giving Arjuna those great dharmic teachings on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, a battlefield which they just unearthed, by the way. And they finally found the battlefield of Kurukshetra, and they're excavating it now. So these teachings on food are very precious. If you want to go to an explique of them, like a more thorough explique, then you would look into the Kundalini Yoga system, because unfortunately some of the beings that brought the Kundalini Yoga system to us in the 1960s to the West, left out the food element and left the prana rather undiscovered too. You just breathed a little and that was all you needed to do, and they didn't really explain to you, like the Vedanta does, that the prana has connections to it, that your breath is just the outer effect of prana, that the power of your eyes to see and the power of your ears to hear, power of the tongue to taste, the power of the hands to feel, the hand with 5 fingers to feel, is all due to prana flowing through the body. And I was at prison three nights ago speaking to some of my students there in Salem, and we were talking about this prana, how it makes the eyes see and ears hear and so forth, and how we just overlook that. Man does not live by bread alone then means he lives by prana. That's what animates everything. So I was telling them the story of the gods all got together. There was the god of the sun, there was the god of the moon, there was the god of fire, and there was the god of earth, and they all got together and they started arguing who is the one that supported the body of human beings, who is the greatest one among them. So they all argued and made their points. Fire said, well, I give them warmth, and sun said, I light their way, and moon said, I grow their herbs, and so forth and so on. You see, finally prana stood up and said, you're all wrong. I alone support life and the body of human beings. And they were not disposed to believe him. So he left. They all fell flat. The sun didn't burn, the moon didn't shine, the forces of the body didn't work, the senses shut down. All the gods, the Indriyas, all found out that prana was there. Who's your daddy? Usually, prana is my daddy. Try and find out how to put it in the jargon of this age. So that prana then, it has 5 forms. Who would have guessed? You see? How many? It has 5 forms. In fact, Vivekananda said it's one prana, eka prana, but manifesting as 5 forms. So the study of prana then commences, you see, and that's basically what's happening here. Just prior to what we just read, and what we read Saturday afternoon was Bhur, that is earth, Bhur Bhuva Swaha we're talking about, stands for the world, fire, the air that is breathed in called prana. The Bhuvar, the second world, the intermediate space, stands for earth, air, sama, the chants of the Samaveda, and the air that is breathed out, apanaha. And Swaha stands for heaven, sun, sacrificial formula, the sacrifices done, and the vital airs that sustain life when breath is arrested. So there's also a prana that suspends everything. That's in between your in and out breath. There's a suspended breath. That's another thing we don't know. We just think we breathe in and out, breathe in and out. And so by not knowing the suspended breath, we exclude it, you see. And so we don't know the U of M, the U of Om, you see, or the M of Om, if you want to put it that way. All the suspended part of life. That is the breathless state. They call it kumbhaka. Kumbhaka is a suspended state where Sri Ramakrishna had easy ways of explaining it. He said, one time a man was standing next to a man with a gun. The man with the gun discharged the gun, and the man standing next to him was shocked and couldn't breathe. See? So that's this kumbhaka state. You get shocked into submission of all your life force. Everything just goes, it gets arrested. Like there's some pranic police in there. You're under arrest. You can't breathe anymore. And I was telling someone yesterday that people go into periods of 5-10 minutes where they don't breathe in deep sleep, and nothing happens to the memory cells, or they wake up fine. So there's an unconscious state of non-breath, see, that suffocation and so forth. But then there's the conscious, easy, meditative flow into the breathless state, which happens naturally when you go from waking to dreaming to deep sleep. Something like 240,000 breaths a day, cut down to half of that at night. So the breath and the prana is very vast subject, and you can't just, sure you can start out watching it. That's a good beginning, because most people have forgotten that they breathe. It's like blinking your eyes. How many times have you blinked since you entered the room? But they call this ajapa. There's japa, where you take your beads, right, and you do the mantra, and that gets you into a deeper state of concentration. But ajapa means the natural flow of your breath in and out. Hamsa, they say. You see, hamsa means great soul. So the in-breath and the out-breath that's happening is, if you were to connect it to consciousness, it would be very powerful. That's kind of the idea. Just like if you're doing japa and you're just doing it lackadaisically, like a parrot, then it doesn't really do you that much good. At least you're not getting into trouble, as long as you're sitting there doing it, the rascally human being. But other than that, it's not really connecting to its deepest potential, is it? So breath is like that. If you suddenly become aware of it, you're going to have to become aware of the existence of prana. In some form or another, you'll make that start. And then you can begin to connect the worlds like Bhur, Bhuva, Swaha, and the matras like A, U, M. Then you begin to master your waking, dreaming, and deep sleep states and so forth. Before then, it's a far cry if you'll do that except by some moment of grace, which doesn't come all that often. You might be waiting 2,000 years for it, if you get my gist. So that arrested state of breath then is one thing that you need to know about, the aprana, and vyanaha they call it, and then there's other forms of breathing that go with these vyahritis we're talking about. So remember, as we study all this Bhur, Bhuva, Swaha, that we're now looking at the in-breath, the held breath, and the out-breath as a sort of another triple connection with this, and food. So with food, in the case of food, we had this beautiful saying of Holy Mother just now, which prompted this song, this bhajan, and in order to tell us that just to eat food is not enough, just like just to breathe is not enough. My teacher used to say that a man does not live to eat, he eats to live. So, but it's become the other way around. People live to eat, you see. That's one of the things that brings them to earth, is earth. See what body is earth. Soil is earth. Trees are earth. Fruit that comes off of trees, therefore earth, and so forth and so on. And so if you don't know that man does not live by bread alone, and that Brahman is the nourishing power in the food, and not just the food, and not just the pleasure of taking the food, then you're again not a knower of Om. You're not a knower of the three worlds. Therefore, Bhur, Bhuva, Swaha, start saying the Gayatri mantra, and maybe she'll bring back some of that wisdom to you just by the utterance of a mantra that's now chanted by more beings than any other in the worlds. Millions of people chant this daily, the Gayatri. I wonder how many of those know what they're saying. Have they studied the Upanishads? India is famous for thousands of seers and holy beings and scriptures. But in this day and age, you take a look there, you go there, you wonder how many of the people are still studying the Upanishads, or still aware of some of the deeper non-dual scriptures that are their very heritage. So this mantra is very powerful then with its utterances. 4 mystical utterances they're giving us now, Vyahritis. We'll get to that in a minute. I have a chart on that. But here is how the process of food works. Here you see the basic mantra there. Ane hidam sarvam pratistam. Ane is food. All is supported by food. And Vashishtha says below here, food taken with an ignorant or brooding mind turns to poison in the body. So if you're eating fast food on the go, then the result of that is going to be a kind of poisonous effect on your life. See, you must sit and concentrate on food and say the mantra over it. Remember yesterday I said you don't really thank God for the food in our tradition because God isn't someone you can thank. See, it's a transcendent reality that everything has, that underlies and supports everything. So it's not so much as, oh, thank you so much for this food, but the mantra itself you're saying over it, that is bringing the connections, the conjunctions, right, together. So the conjunctions are universe, the conjunctions are progeny, which comes from food as well, father, mother, progeny, and procreation, and the conjunctions are learning, teacher, pupil, teachings, and growth, learning. Well, that's the conjunction they're talking about. If you look at anything, there are how many conjunctions? There are 5 great conjunctions, you see. So if you look at them, then you'll see that they're the coming together of the aspects of all of life, including the self. Self is one of them. The self means everything from this body self all the way to the spiritual self in the way the ancient rishis looked at it. The whole thing was a conjunction, was a natural, intrinsic conjunction. And they looked at it that way. When the avatars come to earth, some beings are saying, this is my religion, that's your religion. Other beings are saying, let's try and bring all these religions together. But the avatar is saying, they're always one. What are you talking about? These are my religions. I created them out of oneness. They exist in oneness, and they go back to oneness. And so do you. So that's called Sahaja Tantra Siddhanta. That means the natural state of mind which sees all religions as one of the facets of one diamond. And the diamond itself is I and my Father are one. So that's probably the most natural conjunction you could meditate on. And it's a concept, if you want to call it that, I'd call it a principle, whose time has come with the advent of Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. This is universalism, and it's different than eclecticism or agnosticism or atheism or, of course, all the other isms. Ecumenism, ecumenism, they're talking about it now. Oh, that's so great, you see. But actually it's just getting, all the Christian folds together. That's going to be an impossible enough task to do, what to speak of getting all the religions together. But what if you come into the earth thinking they're already together, and I just have to break down these barriers, you see. Sri Ramakrishna was talking about universally when he said the farmer has a field and he has to bring water to it. So he digs water in different channels to the edge of his field from the river, and he leaves these little mounds of earth at the head of every channel he dug. So then he breaks down the main barrier in the river, and the water flows along these channels and it hits these main little mounds of earth and keeps it back. When he's ready to irrigate his field, then he goes and knocks those little ones out with a pick hoe, you see. And then his field is irrigated in an instant, in a minute, you see. So it's a beautiful story about how these barriers are keeping man from growing spiritually. My religion, your religion, I'll call it this, you call it that. So they need to be struck down. And when they do, then the whole field will get irrigated, and you'll realize that it's all one field, and the water is coming from one source. There are many stories the Master told like that. If you want to know the non-dual essence behind that story, it's that there was another farmer who went to his field, bought some land, and was knocking around in it one day just to see, oh, this is going to be a lot of work. God, I'm going to have to bring water from a river a long time away. So he was like knocking around with a shovel, and all of a sudden he hit this hose that was sticking out of the gun. It's began spouting water. And his whole problem was solved. Somebody had long ago had already put a hose in there and connected it to the river. And all of a sudden he just bumped against it, and his water starts spouting in his land. Saved him all that work, you see. Well, basically, it's a lot of work to go and connect all the religions, and how many huge egos are you going to have to deal with, and problems, and differences in religious techniques and methods and wordage and spans of time and chronology. But if you just have that bubbling spring of ambrosia right there at your source, then it's no problem at all. You are the walking paragon of universality that Sri Ramakrishna was. All you have to do is come amongst us. It won't take that long for a bunch of groups like us to get together and start talking about it. Even in India they were bubbling about it. Oh, Sri Ramakrishna was the first man to ever prove the universality of all religions. He practiced Christianity, he practiced Sufism, Muslim religion, he practiced Judaism, he had visions of all these different things. He had visions of Christ, Moses, Muhammad, whoever he put in Jesus, wherever he put his mind, immediately he saw the oneness of all of that. And then Holy Mother said, no, he didn't come to prove that. That's just what happened. He just loved God so much that every time he heard of a spiritual path, he went towards it to see if it was true. And you end up with the saying of the Rig Veda, Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vadanti. The sages assign to this one principle many different titles. So that's what you're getting in the Upanishad. And to trace it all back out of this high philosophy back to just the basics is food. You see, how we treat food is so important. So saying the mantra over it purifies it so that it will turn into nectar in your bloodstream. You could eat organic foods and everything, and you don't say the mantra. The contention there is that it's turning into poison in your bloodstream. So what's the gauge for that? How you act, what kind of actions you are doing, and in what mode of mind you're doing them. Are your actions full of restlessness? Are your actions full of brooding? Are they full of hope? Are they full of pain and suffering? Are they full of pleasure? Then you're probably not saying the mantra over the food, because your actions should be all done in equanimity of mind. Who said that? Sri Krishna in the Gita. Don't do any act that isn't done in equanimity of mind. Refrain. See, that's action. Forbidden action is to do any action not just whether it's moral or immoral, because sometimes in some settings a moral act can be good, can be bad, and an immoral act can be good. You have to wait to see about that. That's the strange thing about karma. The proof of the pudding, as they say. But one thing is for certain, he says, you should know how to act, how not to act, and when not to act. So that would mean don't act when your mind's in a slothful mood. Don't act when your mind's in a restless mood, angry mood, of course, because that's what bears karma. And that karma forms and you don't know it. And then pretty soon it's lurking back there in cycles like everything else. And that cycle is going to have a forward motion. It's going to come forward on you. And if you're very spiritually advanced, you'll know where it came from because it comes back on you quickly. This was Vivekananda's teaching. The unthought acts of an advanced spiritual aspirant come back quickly to them. But a person who's not spiritually advanced or doesn't do any sadhana, those acts, those ill-thought acts come very slow. So you can't connect them by the time they come around to the cause. You can't connect the effect to the cause. And this is why it appears that evil people are living a good life. They're just living the syndrome of the slow poison path, you see. It's all coming back on them slowly. It'll be twice as hard for them to give it up. It won't be that hard for you to give it up because you're dissolving it every day. You see. You're dissolving your negativities every day. Oh, I made a mistake. Let it go. You see. I'm purifying this. I'm doing that. All I need to do is some japa, some meditation, come to Babaji's class and I'll be fine. See? So the teachings on food are very profound. They start there, but let's move up this chart so we can get it accomplished. On the left-hand side is that quote, "We understand that food is Brahman. All beings existing here on earth are born of food. They retain their existence by means of food. Departing their bodies, they become food for others." So who's going to eat you? See? Fire, insects, whatever it is, beasts in the forest, the body will be taken and it'll just become food for others. So knowing that threefold process, that you live by food, you're born by food, and you die as food, then you're able to place that body where it should be. Give it just enough attention to live healthily and do good actions, then concentrate on higher things. What are higher things? As a person begins to bless with the mantra, he goes from food with mantra to mukhya prana, which is healthy energy, to ojas, which is spiritual energy, to tejas, which is the ability to transmit energy to others. That's a kind of fourfold kundalini teaching. From food with mantra to mukhya prana, from mukhya prana to ojas. I call that spiritual orange juice, you see. And then from ojas to tejas. And tejas is what you saw shining out of the pores of Christ and Buddha and others. Their disciples said they actually saw a shine coming off them. That was this refined spiritual energy. It was food taken up, the energy of which was taken up by spiritual practice, and then radiated out of the pores naturally. Sri Shardadeva used to say, as I rubbed oil on the Master's body, a golden gleam was always coming out of it. So this is a person who thinks of nothing but God all the time. And his second thought is, how do I give this teaching to others? First thought, God. Second thought, how do I transmit this to others? That's it. Probably pretty much all it thinks about. Well, here's how it works, according to Upanishads and teachers. There's an early spiritual awakening, and this all kind of goes across the board with these, you see, generally speaking. There's an early spiritual awakening, and worldly life is commencing. Maybe you've heard about the mantra, but you're not using it yet. You begin to observe celibacy. That's pretty much for monks, but if you're a householder, then you would observe moderation in sensual appetites. You're controlling the energy, not squandering it out through the senses. You're trying to bring it back in. And that energy is, remember, from food, because the eyes do not see by themselves, the ears do not hear by themselves. There's prana in there, and that prana is also in the food. So as you make this connection, you're beginning to learn the secret of storing up spiritual energy. Storing it up, not squandering it. I saw many, many people in my high school squandering it, and in college squandering it. See? So, and then when I saw them in their 30s, they were out of shape, overweight. Their life was over in their 30s, if they ever had a life at all. Because to us, life is spiritual life. Without that, there is no life, no real life. There's just a cycle of birth and death, and return and do the same again. So observance of celibacy or moderation of sensual appetites would be very important to store up this energy, so you have something to bring up. You see, I'm really trying to bring this energy up here. Well, what did you do yesterday? Oh, I went to the bar, I drank, yada yada, they say. I indulged. But non-indulgence is the secret of the yogis. After observance of celibacy, moderate your sense life. Then inception of sadhana. Oh, you come along, I have this energy, what do I do with it? I've got an idea for you, the teacher says. Bring it up the spine by spiritual practices. It's called sadhana. The difference between a professor that teaches, you see, and a yogi that transmits is different. You see, to actually be able to transmit the essence of the teachings, to transplant them in minds and to get those minds to begin moving, that's the power of ojas and tejas. After this inception of sadhana, refined prana floods the nadis. Oh, there's that word again. I'm going to start on an hour discourse on these subtle nerves inside of you, you see, and how life force is flowing along them. You've got to get this 5 pranas, this 1 prana together, and use that to carry, I would say carry thoughts. Carrying energy is one thing, but you'll pretty soon connect that energy to your thoughts. And if those thoughts begin to rise, like a hot air balloon, Sri Ramakrishna said, then you're on the way to enlightenment. There's nothing in your way at that point. You've cast off the sandbags from that hot air balloon, and everything is flowing. So that refined prana flows through all the nadis. That is not just the nerves of your physical frame, the nerves of your subtle body. We talked about that yesterday. Then psychic prana develops. That, well, I've already kind of preempted myself, you see, or jumped the gun, because that's that thought. Psychic prana is in the mind, and it's carrying your thoughts into dream. At the time of death, it's carrying your thoughts into the bardo of between life and death. Those bardos the Buddhists talk about, Tibetan Buddhists. And it's carrying your mind away from the senses in sleep and in meditation. You could have very inward experiences with this psychic prana. Just be careful not to get attached to the occult powers, the psychic powers, and you'll be all right. Because you see how much further there is to go, inward, as it were. Then release of Udgata. This is an interesting teaching in the Yoga Kundalini Upanishad, is that people think, my Kundalini is rising, and the teachers usually say, that's probably Udgata you got there. It's like this microphone, right? Test. Is it working? See, Annapurna, is it working? Is the gauge on the camera? So basically that's Udgata. She's testing you to see if you're ready for Kundalini to rise. So this is a precursor to real Kundalini Shakti. You'll know when Kundalini Shakti rises. It has its earmarks with it, you see. So basically this energy is a kind of testing ground. See, are you ready to awaken and stay awake? And most people aren't. They'll awaken in this process of transmigration, you see. They'll awaken and they'll fall back asleep. They may have to do that several times. It's very rare a soul that awakens immediately by a word. That's in the old days the way they used to do it. Give the young student a teaching, and that young student is a soul that's advanced in previous lifetimes, else they wouldn't have come to the Guru in the first place so young. Then the Guru leans over and whispers a mantra in the ear, and the student just goes out, and you can't bring him back for several hours. He's just already gone by the force of that word into meditation. That's spiritual suggestion, you might say, to borrow a term in English. So that kind of preparatoriness, you see, is very rare in a soul that's fully ready. And we're trying to make ourselves that ready. To hear the words of Vivekananda correctly, like at the summer retreat on the American River 2 weeks ago, we went through a lot of Vivekananda's statements and took them apart. So that Udgata is there. If there at the heart chakra, that's the anahata, you've transcended these 3 chakras, eating, drinking, and sex life. Basically, you've transcended. And you get to the heart chakra, and cycles of transmigration end. Spiritual life begins. What is this? Bhur, Bhuva, Swaha, Maha. So you've come to the great. You've come to the heart chakra. You've come to beyond the 3 worlds. You see, that is the 3 worlds as they exist in the Gayatri Mantra. And now you're living here, and you're vibrating here. Everything here is all sound and light in a refined state. And you walk around saying, whoa, what is that? What is that? You see, it's like coming upon those conjunctions. You always saw it divided. You always saw it separated, maybe even fragmented. Now you're seeing it all together. I mean, that's really a way to describe that mystical experience that happens to people. They don't really know what's happening to them. They're just wide-eyed and shocked. Oh, what is this? What is this? Krishna said. Well, that's a way of describing it. Really, they saw everything fragmented before, and it was Maya. All of a sudden, they're seeing it for the first time as it really is. That's unity. And of course, they're going to be shocked because it's been a long time since they've seen themselves. See, they've only seen the small self and all its preoccupations. And they've built up many karmas, and curtains have fallen in between. Now all of a sudden they've been rent away, shorn away. And that awakening is more likely to keep them from drifting back than any other thing. So that's where spiritual life really begins. All of this has been, let's take food, and let's do an experiment with it. See? Let's try thinking of it as Brahman. Let's try extracting the mukhya prana out of it. I'd say maybe the West in its New Age phase, you might say, has maybe gotten that far. Oh, I'm going to eat organic food. It's got to be out of my garden. I've got to cook it right. It's got to be such and so forth. But really what you need to do is make sure that food, that you purify it of its 4 defects. That is, the person who grew it wanted money. Mass marketing, right? That's a defect in the food. That's a worse defect than spray and insecticide. Your body can live through that, you see. But the mental body can't live through the poison of materialism and money, and it weighs it down, you see. So the first real defect is that whoever's growing it isn't doing it with the right intention. That's the power of the mind, in both directions, evil and good, you might say. So that's one of the impurities that the mantra will remove. See, it's a subtle impurity. It can be removed only by subtle methods, subtle mechanisms. Mantra put together with your concentration, you see. Thanking God for what? For the bad mindset of the guy who grew the food? Thanking the person who sprayed it? Is that what you're doing? Thanks is no good there, you see. You've got to bring consciousness to bear on that element of food that you're going to ingest that is going to turn into poisoned blood or pure blood. Your choice. Other defects in the food is they didn't get enough sun or enough water. That's another defect. Organic defect would be there. And who cooked it for you? And then how did you eat it? Did you eat it reading a murder mystery? See? When you sat down to eat? Or a newspaper? Yeah. Then what do you expect that your food would carry the energy of the mind at that particular moment? So these are the subtle teachings on food. And those are right there in the Vedanta. You don't even have to go to other systems for that. There's 1 minute left, I'm being told, so maybe we will look at how spiritual life proceeds and then look at the 4 Vyahritis chart, the brand new chart, after our break. And our break will be about 10 or 15 minutes, and I have one announcement that has come in. You are a No, that's wrong. We want you to know that we have to reset our live streaming connection at the break, and if the feed stops, we will return it shortly. So keep with this live streaming audience while we reset our connection. So let's take 10, 15 minutes here for a break and then return. Namaste.
Namaste.